No one is giving this advice on how to learn de and het. I've been learning Dutch for more than 4 years now, and if I could go back and do it all over again, knowing what I know now, I would obviously do some things differently. And to be honest, I would probably forget about a lot of the rules and categories that I learned. In this video, I'm going to give you my top 3 tips for how to learn what words use de and what words use het. And if you stick around, I'm going to give you a little tip that my Dutch teacher gave me years ago, which honestly, nobody seems to be giving this advice, but it's going to help you out a lot in figuring out whether you should use de or het while you're speaking Dutch. And without further ado, let's get into the 3 tips. So you've probably heard that there are some rules around which words use de and which words use het. One rule is that all diminutives or verkleinwoorden use het. So the little house is het huisje. The little tree is het boompje, and the little animal or the little pet is het beestje. Another rule is that all plural nouns, so meervoud, use de. So the houses becomes de huizen, the trees becomes de bomen, and the animals or the pets becomes de beestjes. As far as I'm concerned, this is where the logic stops, because while I've seen other rules being taught, for every one of those rules, there is at least one exception. You hear, for example, all plants and fruits and vegetables use de. So you have de boom, de banaan, de komkommer. But there's an exception, het gras. Or you hear all animals use de. So it's de hond, de kat, de vogel. But almost all farm animals use het. So it's het paard, het schaap, het varken. Then you hear all words for means of transportation use de. So de bus, de auto, de fiets. But of course, there are exceptions because it's het vliegtuig and het schip. My advice, if it helps you to learn these rules and categories, just keep it simple, stick to the ones that you know are going to work every single time. And those are the first 2 that I mentioned. So diminutives use het and plurals use de. Now you're probably thinking, okay, great, that covers a tiny fraction of the words I'm ever going to use on a daily basis when I'm speaking Dutch. And this is where the tip from my Dutch teacher way back when comes in really handy. His advice was this: when in doubt, use de, because 75% of the time, you will be correct. I actually love this advice for beginners who are just trying to go out there and speak Dutch and be understood. There is absolutely no need to stop yourself mid-sentence and ask whether a word uses de or het. A Dutch person will no doubt hear that you've used the incorrect article, but they're still going to understand what you're saying. And when you're just starting out, you're just trying to make yourself be understood and get as much practice as possible. So just let your sentences flow and use de when you're not sure. Now, despite the fact that I really like this advice for just using de when you're unsure, I by no means want to discourage you from actually learning the correct articles. And that takes us nicely into tip number 2. So what's the best way to learn when you should use de and when you should use het? We've already established that there is virtually no logic to it. So if you want to speak grammatically correct Dutch, you are going to have to do a little bit of memorizing. What I did in the beginning, like many others, is used flashcard sets to learn vocabulary. I used an app called Quizlet for this, and I studied nouns in various different categories like parts of the body, work, or the weather. And every single time I learned a noun, I would make sure that I learned the correct article. So I wouldn't just learn that the body is lichaam, I would learn the body is het lichaam. And I didn't just learn that rain equals regen, I learned the rain is de regen. Now, there's absolutely nothing wrong with this method, but if I could do it again, there are some things that I would do differently. It's been said that the top 1,000 most frequently used words in a language make up about 80% of speech. And those 1,000 most frequently used words are a combination of nouns, adjectives, verbs, pronouns, prepositions, and so on and so forth. And nouns, which are the words that we need to learn de and het for, make up something like 35 to 45% of the 1,000 most commonly used words. That means if you focus on learning the 1,000 most frequently used words, including the correct article, so de or het, for something like 300 to 400 nouns, then you'll have learned 80% of all the articles and nouns that you will probably need in everyday speech. Now, this is what you should be focusing on. I just looked through my Quizlet flashcard deck on weather. Did I need to memorize the word de neerslag? No, because I've never used that word, and this is the first time I think I've seen it since learning it 4 years ago. So my advice is yes. Memorize vocabulary and always memorize the article for every noun that you learn. But focus your efforts on the most common Dutch words because these are the words you are guaranteed to actually need when you're speaking Dutch. The YouTube channel Learn Dutch with Bart has a playlist of videos going through all of these 1,000 most common words, so I'm going to link that in the description if you want to check that out. But I'd recommend finding or creating your own flashcard deck of these 1,000 most common words and try to learn all those nouns with their respective article de or het. That takes us into tip number 3. Have you ever asked a Dutch person how they learned when to use de or het? Or how they know a specific word is a de or het word? Chances are they said something along the lines of, I have no idea, it just sounds right. It's no different from when a non-native English speaker asks me, why is it I'm on the train, but I'm in the car? How do I know the difference? How do I know which one to use? I honestly don't know. I just know that one of them sounds more natural to me, and that's what I've heard all my life, so that's just what it is. One of the things I've focused on a lot since I started learning Dutch was getting a lot of input of spoken Dutch. Not just passively at the grocery store or at work, but actually sitting down, watching Dutch YouTube videos, Dutch TV shows, movies, listening to Dutch podcasts, music, and that sort of thing. I started out with really basic stuff like Nijntje and Kikker and Vriendjes, which they're literally made for toddlers. And then I gradually was able to move on to more age-appropriate content like first dates or Keuringsdienst van Waarde. Nowadays, I watch a ton of Dutch YouTubers, and I think it probably makes up more than half of the content I watch on YouTube. So what's the point? Well, in language learning, there's actually a model for this, and the first hypothesis of the model is known as the input hypothesis. This states that learners progress in their knowledge of the language when they comprehend language input that is slightly more advanced than their current level. So by constantly exposing yourself to all this spoken Dutch, you get a continuous stream of comprehensible input, and that helps you internalize grammatical structures and vocabulary naturally. And the result is implicit learning, which doesn't only apply to language learning, but this is the process of acquiring knowledge unconsciously and without deliberate effort. So through regular exposure to Dutch, your brain begins to pick up on patterns and rules like which nouns use de and which nouns use het. This is how native speakers learn their first language, and also the reason why native Dutch speakers cannot typically explain the rules of their language to you. So tip number 3 is you have to get a lot of input of spoken Dutch and try to make this a daily habit. And I know this is really annoying advice because it does not give you immediate results, but I wouldn't be saying it if I didn't have firsthand proof that it actually works. Luckily, I have the privilege of sitting here today with more than 4 years of learning the language under my belt. So my brain has taken in a lot of word combinations repetitively and has done its thing to kind of save these and internalize them. So for me, I have subconsciously heard people say in dit geval so many times that if I hear someone say in deze geval, it immediately sounds wrong. The bottom line is you're gonna get this wrong all the time. I still do, and it doesn't really matter. But I promise you, if you focus on getting the most common words down and make sure you're getting lots of exposure to Dutch at a level slightly above your current level, you're gonna be well on your way. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.